Welcome to the Lemons and Pineapples podcast. I'm your host, Emma O'Brien, personal development coach, HeartMath practitioner, dog photographer, and entrepreneur. In this podcast, I share tools, strategies, and amazing guest interviews to help you improve your mindset and your well-being with a sprinkle of fun and probably some mention of dogs along the way. So without further ado, let's squeeze the day. Hi folks, welcome to episode 27 of the podcast. Today, my guest is Melissa Rohlfs, and we're going to be talking about how to kick a sugar habit. First up, a little bit about Melissa. Melissa Rohlfs is a certified holistic health and life coach, helping busy mums and teen girls find freedom from the struggle with food so they can be at peace with food, their bodies, and their lives. She is committed to empowering women to break free from dieting, emotional eating, and self-image issues so they can ditch the diet mentality and feel empowered in their own skin. After her own tumultuous history with food, she learned how to deal with the core issues around her broken relationship with food. And as a result, she felt called to go to school and learn to teach other women how to do the same. She graduated from the Health Coach Institute as a holistic health and life coach in 2018, and she is the proud owner of Free to Be Coaching. Welcome to the podcast, Melissa.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
It was great to have you, and I'm excited for this conversation because I think sugar habits are something that many of us do. I know I do. For prime example, today has been a super busy day, and the only thing I've eaten since breakfast are some chocolate-covered toffees. So if anyone's relating, don't follow me for eating habit tips. Tell us, before we jump in, a little bit about your relationship with sugar and kind of why we find ourselves having this conversation today.
Yeah, so for me, it started in childhood. I remember being a little girl and just hiding sugar and cookies and candies and all sorts of sweet treats, that's a mouthful, in my room because it made me feel better. I mean, I was overwhelmed and kind of stressed out with life. And as a kid, it became my coping mechanism. And that carried with me. And so I learned, in childhood, and it just carried until I learned a new way of dealing with what was really going on instead of just trying to stuff the feeling with sugar. So that's a little bit my story and why I'm here. And did you ask me something else?
Oh, I think that was it. No,
Okay.
That's good. Thank you for keeping that brief. So if I was to ask you, for somebody listening who's wondering whether or not they have a sugar habit, or whether, like me today, sometimes it's the easiest thing to reach for because, full disclosure, there's nothing else in the cupboard to eat today because I haven't had time to go to the shops, which is a whole other thing in itself. For someone who's not sure whether they have an actual problem with sugar or whether it's just, it's an easy thing. If you're hungry as well, it tends to be the first thing that you reach for because it's super satisfying in the short term. But what is a sugar habit? What defines a sugar habit?
Yeah, I think it's really going to sugar when you maybe have a feeling that you don't know how to handle or you don't want to handle. So maybe it's feeling stressed or lonely or overwhelmed or exhausted. Maybe your pattern is at the end of a day, you find yourself on the couch with a tub of ice cream or a bag of Oreos or whatever that looks like, just as a kind of way to calm down. So I think habit is defined by how often you're eating the sugar and why you're eating it.
Yeah. Okay. And I think that's really that's a really valid and important point to realize. And I imagine it would look like what I've done today of eating chocolate-covered toffees and reaching for those when I had other healthy foods available, and actually making an active choice to pick the sugar instead of something that actually would be more nutritious and would not have that kind of high and then the dip afterwards.
Totally. You just nailed it.
Excellent. How much sugar is too much sugar? So I think for lots of us, you might have a dessert after dinner and have a chocolate bar or a handful of Smarties or, I don't know, a bowl of ice cream or something like that. when does it start to tip into being a sugar habit that's detrimental?
I think you will know that because of how you'll feel. So our bodies are always talking to us. They're always communicating with us. We haven't been taught how to listen and tap into that. So I can sit here and I can give recommended amounts, but it's going to be different based on the person. And I think the main thing I'm going to focus on is why. Why are we going for the sugar? What's really driving that behavior? So I think you'll know that you have a sugar habit if you can't get through a day or two without thinking about it, without eating it, without kind of feeling like you need to have it. And I think it's important to clarify too, because we need sugar, right? Like it's a form of energy, but I think the form of sugar is really important. So natural sugars like in fruits, awesome, super important, need those. And I also think it's impossible to live sugar free just because sugar is added to so many things. So I think if you are looking at it from that lens, focus on getting your sugar from sources like fruits, maybe do honey, maple syrup, coconut sugar, focus on the source of the sugar and how it's made and how it affects you. And that'll kind of be the indicator on where you're at with the sugar habit.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point to say. Also, some people have a sweet tooth, which is okay, but like you say, to rather have, to quote the title of my podcast, a slice of pineapple or some strawberries rather than a Snickers or I don't know, something else that's massive, a donut that's massively loaded with sugar. And when it comes to our love for sugar and like the piece you're sharing, I suspected they might at some point do that. So when it comes to people with a sweet tooth and when it comes to enjoying having sugar, what I'm hearing from you is that is fine. It becomes a problem when we're actually starting to self-soothe with sugar, and it becomes a need to have the Snickers because it's going to make me feel better, or I need to have a candy bar or whatever that's going to make me feel better. Why is it that we end up getting hooked on sugar in particular?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I think to speak to your earlier point, you totally nailed it. Like it's really about the why, but I think we get addicted to it because it is addictive. I mean, it's 9 times more addictive than cocaine. And I think, a lot of the purified sugar and the sugar that they're putting into foods such as ketchup that isn't necessary. I think we're getting it's sneaking in other places. So we can be super mindful, and really try to eat the fruits and the maple syrup and the honey and do really well with that. But if it's sneaking in other places and we don't know, I think that maybe sabotages us a little bit.
Yeah, and I mean, look, I think there's not much you can do to avoid it unless you eat a completely kind of natural, very kind of whole food diet, which I don't know for many of us is, especially, busy business people, busy mums. I mean, it's very difficult, I think, to eat completely clean all the time because of the food prep time more than, I don't know that it's more expensive to eat healthily if you buy raw ingredients, says me who, I try, but I think it's just easier not to. It's easier to go for the processed stuff if you've had a busy day and you haven't got half an hour to prep something from scratch.
Absolutely. And I think too, it's tricky in that because it seems like the food is always changing. So, what I do is I will buy a product that I'm really comfortable with. I trust it. And then a few months later, I'll look at the label and I'm like, that's even changed. So it's always like you have to stay on top of it. And that can be exhausting and overwhelming too.
Yes, absolutely. So I'm going to ask you a question about sweetener, but I wanted to, because that's an interesting one to have a look at. But what I want to know, what I'd like you to explain, and I'd like to know from you first, is what sugar does to our bodies and brains that make it so addictive for us, that mean that we reach for it, that mean that it's, I mean, like for a prime example, like today, going for the chocolates because I'm a bit hungry and I'm on the go. Why do we do that?
I think it's easy. I mean, let's just be really honest. You said this a couple times and I couldn't agree with you more, is that it's easy. A lot of times if we're hungry, if we're tired, if we feel a certain way and we know we need some nourishment or some fuel, it's an easy thing to grab. Whereas it's already packaged, it's already there, you can grab that. Whereas if you were to cut some fruits or some vegetables, that takes a little bit more time and planning. So I think convenience is a piece of the puzzle. I think the other thing is that when we do eat sugar, it makes us feel good. It releases dopamine in the brain. Those are the chemicals that make us feel good. And over time, to keep eating sugar and get that same dopamine release, we need to eat more to feel good. So it's kind of addictive in that sense, that it creates more dopamine release and we need more to feel good because our bodies and brains get used to it. So the thing with that is you're going to feel really good for a while and it'll change your blood sugar. So your blood sugar goes up like to the top of a roller coaster, and then you come crashing down and you're lethargic, you don't have energy, you're angry, you're hangry. It's not a pretty sight. So it works well in the moment when you need that, but for the long term, it's not the best solution.
No, and it sounds like with that addiction cycle, you have that kind of the dopamine hit, you have the energy boost, you have the kind of drop off, which is quite rapid, and then you reach for something to pick you up again. So I can see how it ends up being a really vicious cycle that's very hard to get out of. When it comes to replacing sugar with artificial sweetener, just tell me a little bit more about your thoughts on that.
Not a fan.
No, I mean, it's foul. I hate sweetener. I don't think I think it's worse for you, for your stomach and everything than sugar.
Yes. Wholeheartedly agree. So if you feel like you need to have a sweetener, I would encourage, again, the honey, the maple syrup, coconut sugar is great because that'll help stabilize your blood sugar. It's low glycemic. Those are probably the top 3 alternatives because those artificial sweeteners have a lot of chemicals. They have a lot of things in them that our bodies don't know how to process. They aren't familiar with processing, and they are not healthy at all.
Mm-mm. No, and they're foul. I mean, I would rather not have anything. I don't drink very much Coke at all. It's something if often if I've been out on a photo shoot and it's been hot, a nice cold Coke is something I'm occasionally might treat myself to. But we were a bit horrified recently in that they changed the recipe of Coke here, and it had, you know, less sugar, same great taste. And it wasn't the same. It was awful because they'd loaded it with quite a lot of sweetener. And I think they have shifted it back because it was, if I want no sweetener in my Coke, I'll drink a Diet Coke. If I want a full fat Coke, I want the sugar in the Coke, please. Thanks.
That's what I paid for.
That's what I paid for. That's what I was expecting. And I've just been really disappointed with all of the sweetener in it. But yeah, and I think that's this comes to the point, and we're going to talk about this. I'm going to ask you about this now, is actually it's about if you are eating a lot of sugar and you need to cut it back, is cut it out. How do we go about doing that? How does somebody who's having a lot of sugar and doesn't want the sweetener alternative, how do they go about weaning off the sugar entirely to start to kick that sugar habit?
Yeah, this is my favorite thing to do is I love to find upgrades. So I don't believe in like removing things entirely. So I'm all about upgrading, and let's get some simple swaps that taste just as good, but are healthier for you. So for example, I mentioned a few times, you know, the honey, the maple syrup, the coconut sugar. You can also do the same with baking. You can do the same with some of the processed foods are not terrible. There are some better ones than other, but I love like to do simple swaps and upgrades because I think people want the sweetness. I think we need the sweetness sometimes, but I think we can do it in a healthier way.
Could you give me a couple of examples of what that might look like for people?
Yeah. So, and I have some recipes too I could probably share. So there's a really great, like healthier peanut butter cup that you could create using natural peanut butter and coconut oil. And maybe there's 2 brands of chocolate chips here in the States. One is Enjoy Life, they're dairy free. And then the other is Lily's. And I think they are lower in sugar. So just finding some better alternatives. But again, I do have some recipes if that would be helpful to pass along, because I think that can be overwhelming. It's like, I know that I need to do this, but where do I start? So I love to like give just like a foundation of like, here are some things you can do. The other thing that's really fun is to play with cooking with dates. Have you had dates before?
I've been on a few bad ones.
Okay. Not that kind of date.
You opened the door for that one.
I did, but I'm tired, remember?
So a date isn't something I would choose to eat.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So there is a great recipe where you can make some energy balls using dates. You blend them, you add some coconut, some other ingredients, and they are so good. I think you would be surprised after a while, because they do have a little bit of a toffee taste to them. So you might surprise yourself.
Yes, I think if you can share recipes, and I'll pop them in the, if you've got a link to them, I'll pop them in the show notes for people to have a look, because I think that's the thing, isn't it? So something like that, if you can make some time to do a bit of home baking, there's things, they sound like the things that can go in the fridge or go in a biscuit tin in a cupboard that will keep for a while, that are a great alternative. If you've got that moment of, I haven't got time to eat and I'm a bit hungry, I can have something which is going to be far better. And it sounds like it could be something even a cooking novice such as myself might be able to manage.
100%. If my teenager can do it, I think people are good.
Yes, it depends how good your teenager is at cooking, because I have my teenager is quite a baking expert. So
okay.
Yeah, but it sounds like
maybe delegate that.
She's not here currently. She's in the UK at university. Probably not quite sure how sober she is right now because she's just started. So anything else you'd like to add when it comes to shifting out of a sugar habit? I wonder, what's the mindset shift that has to happen for people to really start to kick a bad sugar habit?
I'm glad you asked, because I think the thing is that we have cravings, right? And so we might identify, I have a craving, and we think that it's a physical craving, or maybe we need more sweetness. So we reach for the sugar. But if we can just pause and ask, what am I really craving? That can be really powerful, because maybe you're not craving the sweets. Maybe you're not craving food. Maybe you're craving more time with friends, more time alone. Maybe you just need some space, but all you know is you have a craving. So I think if we can get curious and really ask ourselves, what am I craving right now? That can create a big shift going forward, because we just identify, I'm craving, I feel uncomfortable, I'm going to try to eat something to avoid the feeling.
Yeah, that's a really, really great a great piece, and that's a big takeaway from me from that. I think is that moment of stopping and is it the sugar I want, and seeing if you can meet that need alternatively without and it is detrimental self-soothing, because it's like we've said, you get into this circular pattern with it. You might feel good for a minute and then you're going to feel yuck in 20 minutes time. Thank you for that. So I think that's a really, really big takeaway from our chat with that, is to just take that pause and have a moment of consideration. Amazing. I believe you have a resource to share with my listeners. Just tell me a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so it's a guide on how to kick sugar cravings to the curb. Talks a little bit more about what we've talked about, a little bit as to why sugar is detrimental. What are some things you can do when you feel the cravings come on, and some recipes in there as well. So I'm all about here are some swaps. Let's just do a little shifting. Let's swap and let's do this going forward, because it's not about deprivation. I don't think that works. If you take it away or you deprive, we just want it all the more. So let's have it, but let's have it in a healthier version that's going to be better for us long term.
I think that's brilliant what you've said with the upgrading and the swapping it out, because often it's like giving up smoking or giving up something that you physically and biologically get a lot of pleasure from. It's very difficult to go cold turkey with that, and often you end up feeling really revolting and then falling off the wagon because it's really, really hard. So I like what you've said about the swaps, because I think that gives a really alternative. And one of the things that's come up with the podcast, with conversations I've been having with people when it comes to mental health stuff and mental wellness and making changes, it's about being gentle with yourself. It's about treating yourself with compassion, not saying, oh, you've got this sugar habit, let's punish you for having it. And it's a process. Giving up something like this is a process. And I think you've given some really valuable pointers here for people who are going through that process, doing the swaps and asking the question, what is it I really want in this moment? Amazing, Melissa. Thank you very, very much for this. This is some really valuable information in our talk today.
Of course. Thank you for having me. I think it's been a good conversation.
Just remind everybody, I will put your links, and I'll put the link to the freebie in the show notes. Where can people find you online?
My website is free2b.coaching.com. So free2bcoaching.com.
Amazing. And what's your Instagram handle? Because I know you're quite active on Instagram as well.
free2b and then _coaching.
Brilliant. I'll put both of those in the show notes. Thank you again for being here and for sharing your knowledge with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening, folks. I hope you've enjoyed this episode. Please go and find Melissa online, and I will see you guys in the next episode. Bye for now. Thank you for listening to today's episode. If you've enjoyed it, please share with your friends, and be sure to leave me a 5-star rating and review, especially if you're listening on Apple Podcasts. To find out more about my one-on-one coaching, please visit my website, which is emmaobriencoach.com. And remember, folks, when life gives you lemons, you can always choose another fruit. See you next time.